which brings us to the last of Representative Kovacs' or Chairman Kovacs' bills. It's an act related to courts and civil procedure. And a levy and sale on an execution, which is usually a collection matter of some sort. It exempts from attachment of $500 in a savings or deposit in a financial institution or banking institution. So as opposed to being totally broke, they can't take any more than up to your last 500. Doc.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the type of bill that sometimes is a little out of my bailiwick. Having said that, a constituent brought this to my attention, and I think that it was a little surprised that if a financial institution or organization attaches you with a lien of some sort, they can take every dime out of your bank account. I didn't realize that. For those individuals in a lower socioeconomic levels, that's only going to make things even worse. I did, through Ledge Council, I did a little research, and I give them the credit of looking at similar bills across the country. And there were various amounts attached who had 200, 250, 750, what have you. I thought 500 was an appropriate amount. We can discuss that, but I think you can't take every last dime out of a person's pocket when they're facing, destitution as it is. You got to leave them with something besides the house. Okay, so that was the genesis of the bill, and I think it's a good bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Any questions? Yes, David.
Well, not a question. I like the legislation a lot. The only, you mentioned about the $500 amount and where to go with it. Maybe something in line with, what is the average monthly rent in Rhode Island, so that, if this happens to a person, it's not a situation. At least they've got a little bit of room to at least pay their rent. So maybe it's not their specific rent, but if we could find a general number, say again, like I said, the average rent within the state of Rhode Island. I think that
Representative Place, I wouldn't mind any suggestions about where that number should be. Again, through Ledge Council, I looked at a number of different amounts across the country, the different pieces of legislation, and I tried to take an average, let's say, of where it was. But I'd be more than happy to work with anybody who feels that the standard would be a monthly rent or something of that nature. I have no problem with that.
And then the other comment I had, just reading through the legislation, it has other things in it, and I think the legislation might be a little dated. On line 4, it talks about $300 for school books. I tell you right now, my 20-year-old daughter's taking 4 classes, and I'm definitely spending more than $300 per semester on books. So,
what page is that?
It's on the first page, line 4. It talks about Bibles and specifically, but school books. It gets into, and I assume they're moving.
Wait a minute, on the first page of the bill?
Yeah. Am I in your bill?
Which one?
Let me see.
I'm at, this bill is 5038, correct?
Yeah, that's on there.
Yeah. Was I on
What
the wrong
page are we on?
What page are you on?
Yeah, I'm on, on first
I'm
page.
sorry.
Line 13.
Line 13, okay.
Talks about Bibles,
Yeah,
school
well,
books, other books.
David, Representative Place, keep in mind that language is already in the bill.
Yeah, I know, and like I said, that's why I'm just
So-
saying, if we're looking at this legislation,
Okay.
just for me,
I think
again,
that's for Representative Edwards.
yeah.
And how
Well,
about the next one?
I don't think it needs to be repealed. I just think we got to bring that number up a little bit, because again, there's a lot more than $300 in a semester worth of school books sitting in people's houses right now.
I just like to add, I'm in agreement with Representative Place on this one. I think that school book number should be raised while we're at it. And Doc, I think your $500 figure is too low. I agree. It ought to be maybe equal to an average month's rent for, say, a 2-bedroom apartment or something like that. And maybe that dollar figure also goes up with inflation, so we don't have to revisit it in 20 years. or 10 years.
And this is why, okay, the legislative process is so much fun. I will, with the committee, I will consider all reasonable accommodations for that number, but I would also like to keep it within the general parameters of similar legislation across the country.
Well, let's be leaders.
Well, and I think it's important to remember that our cost of living is substantially higher than the average across the country. So if we're looking at the average, that average is going to include Alabama, Mississippi, and states like that, whereas if you look at it, we're probably closer to New York and California in terms of the cost of living.
Okay, if there's no further questions, there are no witnesses. That would conclude testimony on House Bill 5038, which brings us to the last bill of this evening.